Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And here's the second really big list: the best hit songs of the 2010s. This list, it might have actually been harder to assemble than the worst hits of the decade. And you wouldn't think that, because on some level, it's way simpler. You got a clear idea of what you think the best hits are. You don't really care about cultural longevity in the same way, because good trends are just a happy accident surrounding music you love. And I find it harder to blame songs for not starting great trends in comparison with bad ones that are sustaining them. And overall, the music is better, so it's a much easier task to go through all of it. But this is where things do get a little complicated, because again, we're talking about a decade's worth of time, and personal resonance, it changes. Some songs you predict would stick with you for months or years, they'll fall out of your mind's eye. Whereas sometimes songs will last far longer than you would ever expect. And while overplay kind of stops being an issue, given how I don't really listen to the radio or playlists outside of my own curated ones, the passage of time does matter. Yeah, it kind of sucks that because a song might have dropped in the first half of the decade, it's got that much more time to fade on me, but it also has that much more time to rise in nostalgia. Yeah, songs in the latter half of the decade might have recency bias, but that can absolutely cut both ways. And yes, this means that the order in which the songs appeared on my year-end list throughout the 2010s, it's effectively out the window, just telling you that now. But I'd argue order rather than song choices, it's more indicative of the time. As you've all seen my best hits of the 2010s, you could probably predict the majority of this list, although you might want to expect some surprises, just saying. But one thing I do want to mention is the impact and opinion I've taken on trends. Because as I've grown as a music critic, I've paradoxically found less to automatically praise in what I would call critic bait. I mean, there was a time I would be all over the indie pop and rock crossovers in comparison with the more obvious commercial trends. And while I've always praised country, and that's put me outside of that establishment, there have been trends which haven't really aged well. And the most notable, in my opinion, is the retro craze around the middle of the decade, which does mean there are going to be some notable songs that will miss the cut, where paradoxically, I will get on board with certain trends later and just be a little late to them, and they might have higher placements than you would expect. But more than that, there's always been a bit of pressure to at least acknowledge the mainstream music that is considered cool at the time, and that does mean that certain songs that were a little more basic, for lack of better words, did get elbowed back here. That's not gonna happen with this list, though. This is my personal top 50 that I love, and I'm not about to chase validation here. And fair warning, the order of this list has fluctuated wildly over the past month in which I have been thinking it through. So I urge you all not to take it all that seriously, especially outside of the top 10. But yes, I did say it, this is a top 50. No honorable mentions, so you know what, strap in. We're going to keep the first 25 somewhat short and sweet before getting a lot longer for the second half. Let's get this started.
We got the fire. Yeah, we got the fire. And we gonna let it burn. We gonna let it burn.
You know, a lot of folks, they tend to miss Ellie Goulding's early years with songs like Lights and the ethereal oddness that used to characterize a few songs of that era. But Burn was always the hit that really captivated me the most. A huge bells-accented slice of electropop that's about as basic and straightforward as you can get. But it is a song that feels so much bigger than that. Ellie's vocals layered off the sandy flutters and the crescendos keep some of that same sense of wonder, but then amplifies it, leaning into the sense of scale that was the true hidden weapon of her greatest hits. And as pop has trended a lot smaller, Ellie Goulding has struggled to capture some of that same weight. But you know what? To this day, Burn remains that thunderclap to set it off. Great little song.
And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to.
Alright, look, the decay of Macklemore's reputation across the 2010s has been one of the most disappointing career flameouts I have seen in hip-hop in recent memory. I put some of it on not working with Ryan Lewis, some on the inability to recapture the magic, some on a media climate and audience looking to tear him down for even trying to be conscious, and some on his inability to expand beyond platitudes when, on songs like this, he actually proved he could. A lot got overshadowed in the backlash to the song, which has always felt overblown to me. This was released as a single months before he blew up, and while the initial bars centers his straight self-doubt, it very quickly doesn't stay there, and Mary Lambert's heart-wrenching hook is exactly what's needed to add an emotional core to this critique, especially a lot of it which is around the religious right, which can still feel valid and how much of a struggle feels far from over. Hell, if you know, you know. A lot of well-meaning liberals have then thrown Macklemore and this song aside as an assumption the battle was won, which in a way can date this song. But you know what, if you were there in that moment, or you're there now, I think this has a lot more power and forethought than he's been given credit. I mean, shame he couldn't keep it up, but in an era where Taylor Swift will release You Need to Calm Down to actively center her narrative, yeah, let's step back a bit. This feels more real. Just saying.
Been so long that you forget the way I used to kiss your neck.
Okay, this one snuck up on me. It's neither artist's best song this decade, and we'll get to one of those later on, but I'm not surprised. It required some time and maturity on my part for this to work. It plays to an older audience who have had relationships end amicably, where the weight of years allows the memories to kind of soften into nostalgia. And I like how the spark lingers just enough in the frame to maybe imply just great friendship or maybe a little more. And you can tell there's a naturalistic chemistry between Brad Paisley and Carrie Underwood that not only leads to some great interplay between them, but also the sense of detail in the writing that could come from a lived-in relationship. All amidst a rich and warm country backdrop where Brad Paisley can get one of his better guitar solos off that doesn't need to be all that showy. It's a more mature cut that really has not gotten a lot of critical attention, but as more time passes, I don't know. I think this will. Oh my god, the Warrior era of Kesha was so great. Where Die Young, it's mid-tier on that album, and it's still one of the best hits of the decade. The hard acoustic strumming, that perfect kick drum hit, Kesha nailing the balance between coy and fiery off the coursing synth waves, and a bright enough vibe that makes the underlying sadness of the song hit pretty well. He or she came with someone else. Odds are Kesha's not gonna make more out of it, so just savor the hard moment while she still can. Especially riding into that final crescendo, which is so propulsive. I mean, look, it's the closest thing we're gonna get to this list, Robin's Dancing on My Own, and Kesha has a raw hunger that gives this its own distinctive edge. Also, as I typically like to mention, she did do a down-tempo version on her deconstructed EP that, unlike any attempt to slow down Dancing on My Own, is actually fantastic. So, yeah, in multiple ways, this holds up.
Chillin', breezin', sippin', singin', oh, Beachin.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you think there wasn't gonna be bro country on this list? Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna repeat what I've been saying for years now. There is a spectrum of quality in that subgenre, and Jake Owen's Beachin is near the top of it. A ridiculously fun, blissed out cut that luxuriates in raw charisma for the most lightweight of flirtatious moments. There's so much natural warmth that cuts through even some of the more synthetic production from Joey Moy that I'm always a little bit stunned how well it is held up, or even all the white boy rapping on the verses has enough thrown together structure in order to work. What I find kind of amusing is that so many people these days have misheard the hook to say cocaine instead of cold can, and honestly, I don't mind either interpretation. It's either wholesome fun, or there's a little bit more white powder on the sands in order to set the vibe. Either way, the song is just so much fun and relaxed while feeling warm and organic, and it's probably one of the more surprising locks on this list, but absolutely worth it. And not just because it's become a country karaoke staple for me. But you know what, while we're on that subject...
we go out. Hey, let me get a lighter. That's how it's supposed to be. Cause you know I'm high as fuck. Young and wild. Keep that in there. Free.
The fact that this song still feels so one of a kind in its hangout vibe kind of blows my mind in the 2010s, especially given how much darker and trap-inflected rap would become in this decade. And yet the vibe still clicks miraculously well. Both Wiz Khalifa and Snoop Dogg are on point with their interplay and flows. Bruno Mars exhibits one of his last moments of personality that's distinctly his own before spending the rest of the decade imitating other people. And the Smeezingtons production has wound up feeling remarkably timeless in its kind of cookout vibe. The padded drum kicks off the piano and the subtle touches of bass as the perfect accent for the ridiculously sticky hook. I mean, for a decade that has struggled to pin down the great, fun, chill anthems, which is kind of bizarre given how in recent years it seemed to be the goal of so many streaming playlists. Hell, Young, Wild, and Free, it captured that magic and just blazed away. Great stuff.
That's a real one in your reflection. Without a follow, without a mention. You really piping up on these niggas. You gotta be nice for what to these niggas? I understand.
Alright, this one surprised me in how well it stuck around, especially given the empty void of headaches and frustration that was Scorpion. And you know what, it's kind of exasperating because I can see the science in how Drake built this song to reinforce his appeal to women in a kiss-off that might as well be thrown in his face. But you know what, the more I think about it, that might be the greatest hidden weapon of this song. You present your throat willingly, and they might not actually drive a spiked heel into it. Also, the bounce flip of Lauryn Hill is inspired. Drake can play off it ridiculously well, and as I've said before, the fact that he doesn't play for the obvious hookup vibe, instead of highlighting how he understands, it keeps his motivations more protected, just allowing the song just to go off. And in a decade where he's been chasing the pop dance crossover hit multiple times, it's easily his best. And that's about as nice as I'm comfortable being with Drake, so yeah, let's keep moving. And speaking of people I'm under no obligation to be nice to anymore, again, I got a weird and complicated relationship with my beautiful dark twisted fantasy from 2010. Spoilers, when I put out my list of my top albums of the decade, that's not on it. But what this song gets absolutely right is frenetic, grief-stricken panic, where all of one's insecurities and failures and missteps are thrown into the harshest relief, and you can either self-destruct like how Kanye plays it, or the dead-eyed control that allows you to stare into the sun courtesy of Rihanna, as of course she would. Pair it with the blaring horns, the jagged percussion, the massive crescendos of voices that make the song as cacophonous and wild as it is. Hell, it might not be my favorite cut from that album, but even as everything seemed to fly off the rails, Kanye did find gold. Least here, at least for a little while.
Raise, you better gotta keep it together even when you fall apart. But this ain't my mama's broken heart.
Now granted, if I want the song where panic gives way to a far deeper, barely contained sense of tearful rage, Miranda Lambert is one of the best women working in country to deliver it. It might just be a breakup on the surface, but the greater source of tension in the song comes from Lambert having to knuckle back all that fury in the face of expectations to be a proper lady in the South, as she's already acting out, and she's also about a few minutes away from killing people. What I love about the song isn't just the acknowledgement of how that sort of self-destruction is curdling inwards into numbness, but also that Kennedy reference that highlights not just the stakes in which she feels, but also how systemic this repression of emotion really is, and how dangerous it could be. Co-written with Brandy Clark and Casey Musgraves, and then backed up by the seething, sparking guitars that match the loud, soft dynamic in the content, even as that darker groove will really pick up, it's a killer song. Quite possibly literally.
In my heart, I will always be sure. I will never forget you. And you will always be by my side till the day I die.
I can imagine this is the first really big surprise on this list, but in truth, while I still think the song is a little over-compressed in the production, it is the sort of tropical EDM pop cut that has only picked up more punch for me. Zara Larsson and MNEK have great chemistry. The separation narrative is well balanced in a true duet that's got some real give and take, and the crescendos are just goddamn stunning, playing off the pianos and the clattering percussion. How in the nine hells that this duo managed to make a hand clap sound this huge? It's baffling to me, where even the skittering, fractured drop, it wound up working after a fashion in order to amplify the discordant space in between them. I mean, it's a shame that neither artist has ever really followed this up well, especially stateside, but in one of a few EDM songs that's only grown with time for me, this was a welcome shot that I won't forget.
I don't wanna lose you now. I'm looking right at the other half of me. The vacancy that's set in my heart is a space and now you're home.
What, you thought my picks weren't gonna be problematic for this list? So a guy can't appreciate a self-love anthem here either? Now granted, it's the framing of Mirrors that's always made it a little bit hard to swallow for some. Justin Timberlake is so enamored with his partner because he sees so much of himself reflected back in him, but isn't there something to be said to the notion of couples making each other better and helping ourselves become more secure? I mean, sure, it's absolutely self-indulgent, it's Justin Timberlake, but it's also really damn good at it. The coursing guitars and the strings building off the burbling percussion anchored to the hand clap, just enough opulence to feel big, but also a lot more earnest than Justin Timberlake normally is, and that works for the Go for Broke bridge and final hook. Also, it should be noted we're talking about the radio edit here, so the song doesn't really fizzle out by the end, which does cut back on some of the indulgence a fair bit before it gets frustrating, but overall, just a terrific aspirational pop song. But you know what, if we want to go for the obvious feel-good material,
It's gonna be alright. We don't even have to try. It's always a good time.
who would have thought at the end of the decade, the artist that would come out all the more praised and critical acclaimed out of these two would be Carly Rae Jepsen, pushing herself into a lot more vibrant synth-pop territory with emotion and all the more flair and potency, and yet it's the second hit with Owl City that I could argue really kicked off that push. It's so sugary and wholesome and actually flips all of it into pure strength, where Owl City referencing Prince, of course it feels ridiculous, but not to the point where I want to discount it, especially given that Carly Rae Jepsen can sound sensual and loving it without even trying. I mean, it's pure summer fun buoyancy bouncing off the chipper gummy keyboards and great interplay, especially on that pre-chorus that we so rarely get anymore. I'm gonna hold on to this good time for as long as I can, and really, I think I'll be better for it.
Never mind, I'll find someone like you.
Honestly, this is the sort of song where the review or the recap, it writes itself, because at this point the majority of people, they've already written Adele into the canon of great mainstream acts of the 2010s, and this is one of her crowning jewels. Which, I'll admit, it's a little bit fascinating when you consider how stripped back this really is. Just a spare piano where Adele confronts an ex mid-breakdown, and the entire ream of emotions she goes through is genuinely impressive. Like so many of Adele's best songs, it is a track that carries the gravitas of age and history that is literally beyond her years, especially at that time. But the fact that she sells it so well makes the song feel so damn timeless, especially as the framing courtesy of Dan Wilson's spare production gives her no quarter. As a soulful song, it's already been canonized as a classic, and deservedly so, unlike, say...
So no, honey, I'm good. I can have another, but I probably should not.
You know, I'm not even gonna apologize for loving this song, especially as I am so thoroughly convinced that the majority of people never really clued into the vibe for it in the first place. Yes, I will admit that the video really didn't help, but what works about Honey I'm Good, again, is the framing. Andy Grammer, like Owl City and Carly Rae Jepsen on Good Time, he's way too goddamn chipper and wholesome for his own good. So when he's confronted with a girl who's coming on to him that he has to blow off to go back to his own girl and save face, the entire song feels like a vintage screwball comedy that's just as much of a throwback. And I'll admit there is some charm to that given how damn bouncy the song is before flipping into the organ-inflected pre-chorus, which is where he has to let her down gently, which is by far the best subtle piece of the song, and feeds into the best assertion that this girl is gonna find someone and blow his mind, just not him specifically. Again, maybe I just appreciate the sharp construction that makes the wholesome corniness not bug me. It's one of the reasons I appreciate the great fast-paced writing in some of those old screwball comedies. But while we're on the subject of controversial picks,
You are the thunder and I am the lightning, and I love the way you know who you are, and to me it's exciting.
I'm gonna posit the theory that Selena Gomez has only really made good or great music with other people, where she doesn't have to be the sole focal point of the song. Kind of similar to Britney Spears in that way, where her limited personality augments a strong foundation. And that's very true with Naturally, featuring her old backing band The Scene, that is very much missed on an oft overlooked but genuinely excellent little pop song. The groove is a ton of pulsating sleekness with a bit of low guitar smolder that builds into the gallop of the hook that makes the best off a lot of the really cheap overmixed production that's emblematic of that era and coming away from Disney. And for once, Selena actually sounds like she's enjoying herself. My favorite line of the song is, "You know who you are, and to me that's exciting," which is a great little sentiment that comes from both acknowledging your partner's sense of self-worth and how you want to learn more about it. And with a tempo that feels this giddy, it captures that exuberance so effectively. So, Selena, ever think about going back to this instead of burning toast in the toaster? Because in 2020, songs this tight and fun, they're a lot more rare, and they'd be very welcome. Just saying.
Why aren't you scared of me? Why do you care for me? When we all fall asleep, where do we go?
Come here.
I remember being shocked that this became a hit. It felt impossible, the sort of nightmare fuel that was way too dark, way too subtly twisted, too reliant on horror movie creaks and atmospherics to really work for pop. But Billie pulled it off. The warped nursery rhyme cadence of her hook, how much tension is buried beneath every sound effect off the low patter of the groove, lyrics that can feel surprisingly graphic on the surface that even still imply a lot more danger in what must be surrendered in order to morph her into something that even perturbs the monster under her bed and in her dreams. Yeah, the music industry will do that to someone. And I kinda love how the mask never really drops. Billie will often cut the mood with a snide wink at the audience, but this song doesn't, and that makes it way more haunting and surreal. It's a masterclass in subtlety and mood building, and just how much emotion is buried to let you feel distinctly uncomfortable. And man, I cannot wait for more.
You got that James Dean daydream look in your eye.
The most poignant observation I've had with Taylor Swift the past several years, and where some of her recent music has fallen really flat for me, is spotting the calculation and the machine behind her. I mean, it's always been there, but when the stylism and the writing burrowed into some real human emotion and intimacy, that machine slides to the background. It's not as noticeable. And when a song like Style highlights its own calculation and artificiality, and yet still feels as tight and potent as it is, or even as real as it is, that speaks volumes, and tends to have a lot of staying power in comparison with any other hit from 1989. The minor key groove that picks up some great rollicking presence, enough pop gloss to surround Taylor leaning into more of her sensual side than ever. She's really credible in this lane. I'm a little shocked she doesn't claim this agency more often, and yet she still delivers enough complicated introspection about her messy relationship with Harry Styles that's framed to give neither of them a lot of quarter. The relationship is doomed beyond the hookup, but there's a magnetism to being so hot together that amplifies everything. And it's a place where Swift's pull on classic Americana, it matches that glamour. I mean, we'll come back to Taylor Swift more later on, but for her in pop, it's near her best. Really good stuff.
I saw the light in a sunrise, sitting back in a 40 on the muddy riverside, getting baptized in holy water and shine with the dogs running.
I've been feeling disconcerted about praising this song for months now, even beyond the Brooks and Dunn interpolation that seemingly I'm the only one who notices. I mean, for one, it's the kind of heavy, grim-faced country that leans into southern blues and gospel, and that pulls up a very apocalyptic side that can be kinda questionable in these current times. Made all the worse coming from Blake Shelton of all people, who has no interest in expanding or exploring the sound even further, so it might potentially come across as insincere or pandering. But at the same time, my god, maybe it's my long-buried Catholic angst, but this has got a smolder and firepower to its delivery and weight that places it in a different ballpark, and I gotta think that some of the bleakness is sardonic commentary in and of itself. In desiccated lands, a prayer in God's country is the only thing that provides hope, even as the hounds and the vultures will circle. Again, it's dark as all hell and genuinely implacable, especially with all the brittle acoustics and the echoing bells and that grimy bass. But if you're looking for a rumble of bluesy country that's unlike anything else getting mainstream play, yeah, this clicks. A lot more than I'd ever expect. Granted, if you want to take some of that southern fried rock swagger and flip it to something a lot rougher and probably a lot more fun, Lady Gaga knows how to knock it out of the damn park. Mostly because she has exactly the sort of trashy barroom swagger that works for a country/glam rock stomper that's got Brian May of Queen providing the guitar solo. And yes, I know, it's the easy critic-bait choice for me to pick Lady Gaga at her most rock and at her most beholden to her influences. Spoilers, is going to come up again later on this list. But the hidden truth is that she's great at this. The pop songs I love from Lady Gaga tend to be deep cuts that will never be hits. They're too experimental. Hell, my favorite song of hers is Teeth from the Fame Monster. But there will always be an easy audience for the trashy barroom belting that fits the real grit of her delivery. And there's something that runs really hot in the sense of detail that she gives these songs, even if she can't pull her finger on what's so damn attractive about it all. Well, you know what, maybe I just love it because it's got that sweaty, try-hard piano bar theatricality with some real classic rock oomph that's always matched the theatricality Gaga has always worked, while clicking all the same. But you know what? While we're still talking about theatricality...
Some nights I stay up, cashing in my bad luck. Some nights I call it a draw.
You know, it blows my mind to this very day that we haven't gotten more music from Fun. Nate Ruess has written a lot of songs behind the scenes, and Jack Antonoff has become a producer/songwriter/pop star in his own right, especially within Bleachers. But there is a huge climactic magic about Fun, and all the arena rock worship and the huge hooks and the indie rock pretensions to blow everything into the stratosphere. We Are Young, it might have set the stage and kind of been a little bit middling, but Some Nights was the song that lasted and the song that mattered. And just the memories of 2012 and the hope this quarter-life crisis represented, with the huge coursing drums and the millennial whoops before they even became a thing, with the auto-tune to boot basically tacked on. Again, it's lightning in a bottle. It's also the second major case of classic rock worship, in this case being Queen again, but with a little bit more sincere earnestness filling in for all the pomp and circumstance. Oh my god, there is so much potential. But, you know, while we're on that classic rock worship and that subject...
Just stop your crying, it's a sign of the times. We gotta get away from here.
I remembered what seemed like the entire music world losing their minds when they heard this song. Out of nowhere, a teen pop act decided he was going to make the closest thing to a David Bowie imitation in the structure and the delivery and the sound, and make it stunningly credible. And suddenly everybody realized they had to start caring about what came out of One Direction. Again, part of this song's power is how timeless it sounds, but there's something that only feels more intensely relevant to it with every passing depressing year. It's an apocalyptic song and staring straight into that fire in the hopes that some escape might be found as history repeats itself, and it's got the massive size and grandeur of instrumentation and production in order to match it. And I'll admit, a big problem I've had with Harry Styles ever since is that he's never seemed to have this level of ambition anymore to craft music this grand, cause he can do it. But you know what? He's got a big career ahead. Maybe we got time after all. Okay, you know what? I promise we're almost out of the classic rock worship here. But come on, can you even blame me? The soundtrack and the signature song of A Star Is Born, it's already outgrown the movie, for good reason, and once again it proves that Lady Gaga can sell classic rock as well as Bradley Cooper doing his best Heartland rock star impression. And what I love here is the obvious meta text in the song, a back and forth between the old school rocker daring the pop star to believe in her roots, and then the retort from the pop star who sees a very similar emptiness, which leads to the uncertain dread in both of them stepping out of their comfort zone. It's just a fantastic moment, another song that's already been canonized as a potential classic, so let's talk about one that, even at the time, I overlooked.
You're beautiful. Good Lord, you're fucking beautiful.
The next two songs on this list are both from 2013, and both were songs I didn't give nearly enough credit at the time. And this one, I am so happy that I found an appreciation for it. Happy because I listened to a lot more classic soul and R&B over the years and familiarized myself with the back catalogs of both Mariah and Miguel, but also because this is a song that plays to both of their strengths so effectively. It's warm, it's supple, it's wonderfully organic. Both artists sound comfortable and loving every moment of the duet, just reveling in the sheer beauty, but having just enough low-key charm to not oversell it. It's just so remarkably understated and loose, but still having just enough control to groove to flow well. Yeah, you know what? They both knocked it out of the park. And the fact that neither of them have rarely been this good since, it's a little exasperating. I'll just say it, but if we can get more like this again, I'm on board. And on the topic of an act that has not been this good since, hell, I can make the argument that this is the best song that OneRepublic has ever made. We got a song that I liked and appreciated coming out of 2013, but I just wasn't there yet to get on board. I mean, I thought it was a fluke that it wouldn't stick around. They had all that percussive buildup and real sense of danger to ramp up the gospel swell. I thought it wouldn't persist. I thought it'd just be a fluke if it wouldn't last. And you know what? Even if this was a fluke, it did stick around. Ironically, OneRepublic and Ryan Tedder specifically made their best work all about self-awareness and dreaming bigger, and then they never did it again. Now, regardless, I'm a little bit stunned how much longevity this has had, but it's been so worth it, folks. You can take a chance anytime again now, OneRepublic. That'd be really cool, especially if it turns out like this. We started this section with a pure, straightforward pop song that sounded so huge and then leaned into it with spectacular effect, but the vocals were not completely dominant in the song, and you know, we're ending it with one too. And the aftermath of Thank You Next, going back to Ariana's work with production that actually sounds full and potent, it's just thrilling, especially nailing that balance between cooing and belting that she's gradually honed in even further. And while I would argue the synth touch swell allows for the song to hit with some growling impact, it's that sparkling blast on the bridge that always sent this into the stratosphere. Again, Ariana Grande, anytime you want to go back to this pop and R&B stuff, I'll be on board in a heartbeat, because this, something special. But yeah, that was the first half of our list. Now on to our top 25, a pretty meaty selection where I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, starting off with number 25. One song that's going to be missing from this list altogether is Adele's Rolling in the Deep. It was one of the last to be cut for me, arguably still her signature song, and many people would argue it is a classic to this day. And I'm not gonna say that Overplay kept it off my list. Again, when you're picking across a decade, Overplay stops mattering, I'll say it again. But I will say that if I was looking for a lead-off single from Adele that has persisted for me even more than I expected, and even more than that, well...
Hello from the other side.
It's often highlighted how autobiographical the arc of Adele's albums have been. She ended 21 with Someone Like You, she started off 25 with this, and it's hard not to see it like a natural continuation. Except now it's years later, and this is her reaching across the emptiness with a lot of unfulfilled questions. As I've said before, the weight of history, enhanced even further by the suffocatingly huge production and the gothic tinged bells, it's always given Adele's writing and delivery a lot more weight. But what I like about Hello is that it does reveal some youthful naivete, and how the weight of years can't quite stifle old feelings as much as she might want them to. Sometimes healing can take even longer, especially when you're on your own. And again, the framing is still not painting her all that well. There's real bitterness and grief here, as well as some self-awareness in how all of it looks, but she's still calling into that breach, even as that will force her hand. She'll have to grow up. Don't worry, we'll come back to that. Number 24. I can imagine with the placement of certain songs, with respect to others, it will surprise people, and this is one of those for sure. Now, again, the order of these sort of lists, I don't reckon you should take it all that seriously. I've shifted things around a dozen plus times, and I'm going to regret the order of this in a day or two, but if I was looking for the cut that held onto its power more than any that I expected, it was this one.
If you're lost and alone, or you're sinking like a stone, carry on.
This is one of those hits that never seems to get the attention it deserves. Not just for all the potential that we were all looking to see from Fun, and that they certainly had, and that a lot of the members have shown, but just how it's a goddamn fantastic power ballad complete with a great slow build and a huge guitar solo, anchored in a great settled piano melody, and Nate Ruess at his most expressive. Both low-key at the beginning, and where he has to belt his lungs out, and he sells it. And there's also a real populism to his sentiments. It opens up trying to comfort a friend who is depressed and encountering the reality that they aren't as big or as important as they think they are. But amidst all that and real angst, it is a song that resolves to try and comfort and elevate everyone to look for more, being able to keep on going. Not so much a self-esteem anthem as just weary acceptance and a desire to make the most of it for as long as you can. Again, maybe it's just the climate for this that's making it hit more powerfully, but again, for another shining moment, Fun delivered one of their most straightforward but anthemic cuts. Fantastic stuff. Again, anytime we can get a reunion, get more of this, I'd love to see it. Number 23. If there's a song for which I have had more ups and downs with qualifying, it would be this one. I mean, it came at precisely the right time to strike a chord, and I thought my emotional responses weren't making me objective. This is back in 2012 when I still believed objective art criticism was worth a damn. And then I went back to it years later and realized it was still really great, but maybe not worth a ton of attention because the production was a little played out, and it's not like the artist garnered a ton of attention, as this is easily his best song playing in a very safe subgenre. And then I just said screw it, I put him on this list anyway. And by now, you should know what this is.
If you ask me how I'm doing, I would say I'm doing just fine. I would lie and say that you're not on my mind.
I just know this won't make anyone else's list for the best hits of the decade. Hell, it didn't make anybody else's list for the best hits of the year. But at this point, you know I don't really care, because Gavin DeGraw wrote arguably one of the best adult alternative hits of the 2010s. I mean, it's not saying much because the genre effectively vanished, but it's still true. Ryan Tedder's airy production clashing with the sharp keyboards to amplify the frustrated dissonance and then soothe out some of the nasal squawk of DeGraw's delivery. But what I'd argue is the most subtly ingenious part of the song is how the lyrics are structured, because there's at least a little bit more stately poetry and construction of the verses. It's very clear he's trying to work through it all and assemble that new worldview, have some structure, have some sort of plan, but the hook then flows so well, it reflects a truer emotive reality. No matter how much he's lying to himself, he just needs to dejectively face reality. It's just a great, criminally underrated little song that's fallen between the cracks of history. It's worth revisiting. Check it out if you're curious. It's beautiful stuff. Number 22. Look, I'm not the sort of critic who will lean on being on the right side of history. I mean, it's nice when it happens, but come on, you've all seen this list already, and some of you can guess what's going to be coming. But when I say that I'm pleasantly surprised that this song not only held up, but actually got better with the passage of time, and seemingly a lot of folks agree...
I don't care. I love it.
Ah, the demented party music of 2013, where the club boom was a few years past its expiration date and EDM was sliding in to replace it. I mean, there really isn't an easy comparison to how overstuffed that year felt in terms of trends and sounds, and seemingly at the whirling, chaotic intersection of it all is the blaring, grinding banger of I Love It. The first real mainstream introduction of Charlie XCX, and a song that is stuffed full with so many reckless quotables. Hell, replace the exhausted exasperation of OK Boomer nowadays with some gleeful exuberance, and you effectively have this song. I'd almost say it's kind of punk in some of its ethos. Nothing matters, I'm burning it all down, loving every moment of it, you might as well get fucked and enjoy it. But for me, what I've always loved is that subtle, deep shudder that quakes through the song midway through. It already sounds huge, it goes off, but that's the foundation, and it doesn't feel like anything else that was really charting at that time. It's abrasive in a way that kind of reflects where Charlie XCX is right now. It charted some of her path. I mean, different tones overall, but still a focus on huge, reckless pop of which the mainstream could really use a lot more. In other words, I'll say it, kick ass. Number 21. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Some of the best country songs have a body count, and this artist at her peak was always good for racking them up. But murder ballads, they've been made for decades. Why not strive for uniqueness and make nature herself the weapon?
Shatter every window till it's all blown away. Every brick, every board, every slamming door blown away.
Am I the only one when thinking about this song realizes that there's something that's kind of transgressive about Carrie Underwood using the weather itself as her tool for revenge, a tornado, especially in an era where climate change is amplifying such phenomena, and the song might slip into a weird space of kind of being in bad taste? Now granted, of course I'm overthinking a song that just seems to pull more of its cues from a pitch black flip of The Wizard of Oz, or likely more correctly, Wicked, even some of it the gleaming keys and the strings as the guitar just seeds, but that fits the theatrical swell that's always been one of Carrie Underwood's greatest weapons, where the tornado takes on the role of the purifying finger of God, all against a song that's literally about a daughter killing her abusive alcoholic father. Patricide, everyone! Again, Carrie Underwood got away with a lot of murder ballads in her peak. I kind of wish she was still making them, because she was great at it, and they're frankly a lot more interesting than what she's doing now, but I'll say it again. There's nothing quite like Blown Away in country. It's a singular entry in and of itself that deserves real recognition. Number 20. Meanwhile, okay, surely this isn't that unique, right? And yet, why does this remain so special to me, to this very day?
Girl, tell me how you feel. What's your fantasy? I see it's on the beach down in Mexico. You can put your feet up, be my senorita. We ain't gotta rush, just take it slow.
Well, the obvious answer to that is how So Good is actually more unique, especially in the 2010s, than a lot of people originally thought. Now, granted, a lot of folks thought B.O.B. would have staying power throughout the decade, and I'd rather not talk about how that went, but So Good, it works because it feels like an anomaly, but can only make sense given the artist involved. Only B.O.B. would want to make a gloriously huge pop rap song riding big piano chords, talking about travel and taking his girl all around the world, and only Ryan Tedder of all people would give him the production to make that a reality in 2012. Make it all make sense. I mean, sure, it's bragging, but it's a very different stripe, and one that's honestly a lot more fit for my generation that flexes less and enjoys the experience that much more. Factor in great construction, because B.O.B. used to have a ton of talent in building his bars, and the sheer uplifting exuberance and fun of the song. Again, look, this is another track that I'm not sure could have happened outside of a very narrow window in 2012, but this is the blissed out flex that actually works for me. That emphasizes worldliness, an attempt to absorb culture while sounding inviting as all hell. And you can bet that once this goddamn lockdown ends, this is gonna be the song blasting at top volume. It deserves it. Number 19. Not gonna lie, I really struggled where to place this song. And of the entries on this list, it's the one where I'm least sure of, at least for now, because I'm not sure how it will age with respect to how close we are to the end of last year. And that's the tricky thing about songs that are this small and this intimate. A question of whether they're built to last is tough to ascertain, especially if you might be just outside of its target demo. That being said,
I could lie, say I like it like that, like it like that. I could lie, say I like it like that, like it like that.
another artist for which I could say I was early to than most in order to hop on board, but I and a lot of other critics have realized that this girl has so much potential to come that making statements on her cultural impact right now just feels short-sighted. There's a part of me that's just certain the best is yet to come. That being said, while You Should See Me in a Crown intrigued me, this was a song that won me over completely. Mostly because it took the consistent sense of subtlety and all the aching production from the shuddering bass and precisely placed multi-tracking that's often used to shock and then show how it can translate undercurrents of rage and frustration and genuine hurt and heartbreak. There is a command of atmosphere and emotional nuance that's so damn rare to see this refined so early and yet still very grounded in human emotion. And yeah, she nailed it. In my opinion, the best part of this song is how the vocal line shifts across octaves near the very end. Just the perfect note to match all the fragile dejection. Again, so much raw potential. Billy brought it out of the park. Can't wait to hear more. Number 18. I'm a little bit shocked in the conversation about hits, this does not come up more. It's one of two songs on this list that fit the category on this list where I can ask, you all do know this was a hit, right? And so utterly unique that it should have been worth conversation at some point? Well, let's make sure this is on the record now, shall we? This track is so utterly unique and demented in the mainstream, I'm still a little bit amazed in the listless frustration of 2014 that it actually got some sporadic traction. I should stress it was way bigger in Canada, and thus I got a lot more actual exposure to it on the radio. But still, if critics were hunting for a side of indie rock that flipped the script with the accordion, the pedal steel, the reverse guitar leads, on a song where he tries to sell his soul to the devil and then rejects him because there's just so much of his life that he's wasted that he needs to stumble further into real emotive debauchery, how is that note so cool on concept alone that everybody didn't get on board? And yet this South African band with its warped high concept ideas and impeccable command of atmosphere that just nails the pit in your stomach feeling of everything that's flying out of control. Again, as a hit song this decade, it's damn near one of a kind. Now, granted, it also screams novelty, but this band was legit, and I really wish that 1929 two-part experiment had worked last year. But still, we got this, and their excellent 2016 album, Egomaniac. I'll keep those. It's worth it. Number 17. Well, hey, I did say Taylor Swift was gonna make this list again, and it's with her best hits.
So this is me swallowing my pride, standing in front of you, saying I'm sorry for that night. And I go back to December all the time.
It kind of saddens me that I don't think we'll ever get this era of Taylor Swift again. Well, at least not for a while, until her pop star fades and she makes her back to roots country project in her mid to late 30s, and it gets all the critical acclaim in the world thanks to stripped down production and no other songwriters. But the funny thing is that Back to December is somewhat in that stripe, but also a lot more. Her instrumentation is as ragged as it will ever be, even with more bombastic bells and strings. And again, the core of her best songs have been when we see genuine confessional vulnerability. In the wake of the music that she would later release, this has only felt more unique and poignant. A song where she admits that she blew the relationship, desperately tries to make the play to win him back, and she's got to accept that it's not going to work out. For Taylor Swift to make and perform that song, there's a gravitas to that which I will always have some respect for her. Still her best hit, from her best album too. I mean, if The Archer had been a hit, it would have been close, but yeah, still leaning on this. Number 16. If I'm looking at a hit that grew on me the most this decade, one that I placed on my year-end list at the time, but even then I thought it should receive a little more attention, even as I was still looking to contextualize my odd feelings towards the genre at the time, even as a grand send-off to its trio. I mean, it couldn't be that great, right?
Don't you worry, child. See, heaven's got a plan for you. Don't you worry now. Yeah.
I have been waiting to add more praise for this song for years now, and you know what? Here we have it. A finale cut featuring the husky vocals of John Martin against a mix where the bass simmers beneath the swells of staccato keys that will then explode across impeccable crescendos. And yeah, you know what? Sure, it might be cliche as fuck to break into an acoustic guitar for that second hook, especially at that time in 2013, but for adding that perfect organic touch to match the melodic switch up, and add just that trace of warmth to the father figure in the song who is looking to impart wisdom and hope before departing. It's a song that looks to capture childlike awe against the balance of real-world anticipation and just knocks it out of the goddamn park. I mean, the group might have reunited a couple of years back, kind of. The scattered tour and mix of cancellations has not boded well, but this was the last new music we got from them, and if you're looking for a note to go out on, hot damn, what a way to go. What a way. Number 15. You know, looking back on it now, I'll say it, I'm a little embarrassed by my earliest One Direction commentary. They never really made a worst of list, sure, but I'll admit I was looking for every reason to dislike them. And outside of songs that were just untouchable, Diana being the big one, and especially compared to the fuckboys we see nowadays, they were effectively harmless. And while I'm not going to go out on a ledge and say that some of their albums didn't feel kind of manipulative and really sloppily produced, thank you, Psycho, I gotta give credit where it's justly due. And thus...
We're only getting older, baby, and I've been thinking about it lately. Does it ever drive you crazy? Just how fast the night changes.
I'm not gonna mince words. This is One Direction at their absolute best. It kind of kills me that this has not gotten the critical reappraisal it's deserved, and the blend of genuine melancholy at seeing an old flame move on and get older, and you might not be part of the picture, but you savor the piece of it that you've got. Because again, it's never implied she's actually with any of them. Note the he in the pronouns in the second verse, where most of the song, it's in the first person. There's more going on beneath the surface, because it's that subtle detail, but it works so damn well in accentuating the love-struck longing that makes the best boy band songs. Hell, you can almost see some of the meta text in how the band was nearing their breakup and fans are moving on. Well, until you see flickers of a reunion and everybody goes crazy for it. Guess that never changes that much. And when you match it up with the gleaming keys and the soft guitar to emphasize the soft focused romance and every band member actually getting a voice in the harmonies, yeah, you know what? If I'm taking any hit from One Direction, it's this one. Really underappreciated song. Check it out if you're still curious. Number 14. Alright, look, I'm stubborn. You all know that. And I can't tell you how annoyed I am that this artist made this song. Every critic loves their narratives. They love the comforting boxes in which they can categorize art if only for their own reference. And then songs like this are released and fuck your precious narratives, cause this is one of the best pop country hits of the decade. Easily.
I'll try to make it through without crying, so nobody sees. Yes, she wanna get married, but she don't wanna marry me.
This is the sort of song that made me have to recontextualize literally all my opinions about an artist, because you can't just say he sucks unilaterally if he makes this song, because Marry Me is so stunningly well written, it still kind of shocks me. Again, the elegant soft focus around the acoustics, the strings that slide in order to ramp up the bombast at precisely the right moment for that climax, the piano that slides in for the final hook that's a little more understated, the fact that Thomas Rhett is smart enough to underplay his delivery overall and pull off two genuine bait and switches. And the writing, again, you get that setup that this is going to be your average pop country love and marriage song, and then you realize Thomas Rhett is not the guy to who she's marrying. He blew his chance. And then you get prepped for the big romantic film moment at the wedding where he's going to say something, he's going to win her over, and it doesn't happen. That doesn't happen either. It's an internal journey. It's entirely from the sidelines. One that forces our frontman to confront maturity that's never really been part of his wheelhouse up until that point, but here it clicks, and it's believable. I don't know, maybe Thomas Rhett getting married so young actually helped him grow up a little bit, and while the majority of his brand of boyfriend country nowadays is overproduced, kind of one note and boring for me, this is the best thing he's ever done. I gotta salute that. Great work. This is something special. Number 13. Now, granted, if we were looking for a more obvious example of my stubbornness, it would likely come in my defense of something that pretty much everyone else has already branded a failure. Seriously, I'm expecting video essays chronicling the disaster that was the release of the album behind this song. It's a career killer if there ever was one. And yet, there's one song for which I'm going to stand up to defend. Guess I'm gonna have to go there.
Everybody says say something, say something, say something, say something, say something, say something.
If I was looking for a song to highlight how Justin Timberlake's blend of R&B and country could have actually worked in a modern context, this is it. Now, granted, part of it is him ceding ground to Chris Stapleton in order to build and deliver his huge voice to a larger audience, which I'm very grateful for. But even I really love the production here too. The bubbling bass, the more textured percussion that accents the groove rather than clashing with it, which is usually an issue with Justin Timberlake. A lot of the choppy acoustics, the shimmering sense of atmosphere that gives the track a feel of a torch song, the balance, the blending of it, it's impeccable. And as for the content, you know what, for as goddamn self-righteous as it can feel, again, Justin Timberlake, it's also self-aware enough to know when it should shut the hell up and when the emotions will just bowl right past that instinct, which is the dramatic core of the entire song. And look, I'm among the very few people who don't think Man of the Woods is as much of a failure as so many people do, but if Justin Timberlake was looking to salvage anything out of that era instead of the lifeless commercial crap he's making now, it should be this. A song where the metatext argues both for and against its own existence. Yeah, you know what? I was on a ledge praising this 2 years ago. I'm still there. Not sure I could help myself. Number 12. Okay, if I just say this has become a karaoke staple of mine ever since it dropped, and it's absolutely glorious when it goes off, will that be enough?
Can we go back? This is the moment. Tonight is the night. We'll fight till it's over. So we put our hands up like the ceiling can't hold us. Like the ceiling can't hold us.
Thrift Shop was the song that broke Macklemore. Same Love drew the media attention and likely painted him into a corner that kind of broke his career. But Can't Hold Us was the goddamn banger that could not be denied. The gallop of the textured percussion, the sharp staccato keys, the blasts of horns, Ray Dalton's soulful hook that hits at precisely the right moment, and Macklemore dropping the sort of razor-sharp flow that showed how much he was a force to be reckoned with. His punchlines, they connected. His double time was on point. But more powerfully was, again, how the song was framed. This was power to the people, fists in the air populism. That if he was going to elevate him, he was going to take everyone else there with him. When this actually surged to become a genuine hit, I was convinced we were on the cusp of a real sea change, especially sliding away from the boring, opulent flexing that had overrun the genre for years. All the more true now. And well, again, it didn't happen, and there's reasons for that, and that can even have some good stuff in that subgenre of hip-hop. Even the people who find Macklemore embarrassing these days, they can't deny this track. It's glorious, and for good reason. Number 11. It's funny, I remember when the single dropped from the album late, and I didn't think it would be a hit. The smolder, the double entendres, they weren't quite where the lead artist wanted to be just yet, coming off her earlier singles that year. I still love the song. It was one of my favorite songs of that year, not counting hits. And while it's cooled on me a little since, it is kind of fascinating going back to this now and recognizing what truly exploded from that moment.
'Cause if you want to keep me, you gotta love me harder.
I mean, we could focus on the obvious here. The song is sexy as all hell, with Ariana finally learning to lean into her cooing, sultry delivery as she coaxes in The Weeknd, who is clearly used to being dominant in this sort of situation, and is now a little bit thrown by a presence who can play in his world, and yet he can't quite match yet. And that tension, along with the coursing wells of keyboards and pulsating groove, and the real interplay between them, hell, it's genuinely stunning how well this worked. And relatively early in their careers too, this decade. Somewhat. Hell, one of the singles Ariana released from My Everything, it's probably the only one that's had consistent staying power and not have to contend with acts who have completely, in the case of Iggy Azalea, justifiably fallen off the radar. And yes, The Weeknd had some hits around that time, like Wicked Games, to get him on the radar, but this was his real breakthrough, his crossover. Often started it, probably one of the better songs, but this was really here. It was his best hit of the decade. False Alarm wasn't big enough. I'm not happy about that either. Hell, you know what? If rumors to believe, The Weeknd spun that connection with Ariana even further into the hills, which to many people would call one of his iconic hits. In other words, I haven't really brought up cultural impact when it comes to this list, but when it becomes just another piece to stack in net positives on what this song has meant, we can call this special indeed. But before we move on to the top 10, I'm going to do something a little bit different here. See, I was pulling these hits from the United States year-end Billboard Hot 100 charts. But I'm not American, I'm Canadian. And we got a very different ecosystem of hits up here, which means there are songs that were huge in this country and really should have been stateside, but weren't. So pulling from the Canadian year-end Billboard Hot 100 list, here is, without context in alphabetical order, some that could have had a shot to get onto this list. And spoilers, you're about to hear a bunch of Mariana's Trench. Starting off with, from Loud Luxury featuring Brando, Body. By Mariana's Trench, Celebrity Status. By Tegan and Sarah, Closer. By Mariana's Trench again, Desperate Measures.
I've been pushing for this for so long. Kiss me just once for luck. These are desperate measures now. I can't let this.
By Ed Sheeran, Galway.
You're my pretty little Galway girl.
By Eric Church, Give Me Back My Hometown.
Hometown, 'cause this is my hometown.
By Lord, Green Lights.
Down every road. I'm waiting for it, that green light. 'Cause on the aisle, come get my things, but I can't let go. I'm waiting for it, that green light.
By Mariana's Trench, yet again, Haven't Had Enough. By Kygo and the late Whitney Houston, Higher Love.
Bring me your higher love. Oh.
By Carly Rae Jepsen, I Really Like You.
We were out of touch. I really like you. And I want you. Do you want me to?
By Tegan and Sarah, again, I Was a Fool.
I was a fool for love. I was a fool.
By Aaron Chupa, I'm an Albatross, the remix.
A mouse, 'cause I'm an albatross. I'm an albatross.
By Mark Ronson featuring Miley Cyrus, Nothing Breaks Like a Heart.
Things fall apart, but nothing breaks like a heart. Nothing breaks like a heart.
By Clean Bandit featuring Zara Larson, Symphony.
We hold me tight and not let go. Symphony.
And finally, by Nickelback, This Afternoon. Yeah, that just happened. You're welcome. And when Sugar by Brockhampton inevitably makes our 2020 year-end list, well, you know what? I'll say it again for those who are in the back. The Canadian charts, they're always better. But now back to our list proper, number 10. I mean, at this point, you should all be able to guess what's going to be in my top 10. Hell, I can make the argument I telegraphed the majority of it in the list already. But this is one for which I know I'm on a ledge, and I know pretty much nobody else is standing with me. But fuck it, Kygo and Selena Gomez made one of the best electronic hits of the decade. I'm sticking with it.
Who's gonna walk you through the dark side of the morning? Who's gonna rock you when the sun won't let you sleep?
Again, it always feels like I'm kind of on a ledge defending Kygo as much as I do, as it seems like the popular consensus is that his tropical sound, it had its moment, and he's now kind of played out chasing that vibe. And my response is, yeah, you know what, to some point, that's very true, sure, but he's also way better at that sound than so many others, so why not stick with it? There's an organic bounce to how he structures his grooves and his more textured percussion off the keyboards and guitars in a way that doesn't feel choppy or abortive or overmixed or thin within that mix. There's a balanced smoothness that he only fractures with chopped up vocal samples or a more standard EDM drop when he has to, and the melodic breakdowns, they actually stick because of that contrast. Also because they're really good. And Selena, you know, I'll say it, this song was the kiss off to Justin Bieber we all needed, and frankly renders all of that last album redundant. The hook on this song is massive. It takes her reaching the breaking point and throwing her hands in the air in more ways than one. The multi-track exasperation is her most dynamic and anthemic moment of pretty much her entire career. And let's face it, this is 2020. As if we need another excuse to tell Justin Bieber to go the fuck away when he spirals again, this is what I'm going to be blasting. I'm not sure either of them are ever going to match this song, but on the dark side of the morning, I'm going to take this all the way. Number 9. There's been a conspicuous absence on this list for a while, and considering how ubiquitous he's been on the charts, especially in recent years, you'd think he would get something here beyond my little Canadian misadventure. But the truth is that a lot of his best songs are not his hits, or if they are, they're not in the States. Nor do they seem designed for the States. After all, it's not his true home. That's where and to whom you can tell he targets a lot of his best songs, that home, and sometimes they don't really cross over. But with one very big and very welcome exception.
I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes, singing to Tiny Dancer.
Discovering that I've got the raw vocal range to sing this song at karaoke earlier this year, it was a personal highlight of mine, but moving beyond that, I have loved this song since it was released effectively as the B-side to Shape of You. And I like both those songs, but you can tell that Castle on the Hill was a hit by organic accident, not by targeting, and yet it's Ed Sheeran's best hit by a mile. The guitar timbre sounds like a vintage U2 song, only reinforced by the homespun details of the friends that he left behind that helped shape him regardless, and with enough fine details to reinforce how at his core, Ed Sheeran does pop because it's his job, but he writes folk and rock and grime songs because that's where the passion is, and it bleeds through in how he opens up and just howls on that hook. He's got a rawness to his vocal timbre that I'm honestly stunned he doesn't make more songs like this. They're borderline old school heartland rock, sure, but the firepower, it's unmistakable. And maybe you can just call this another classic rock throwback, because it is. But in 20 years, when a lot of the bigger pop hits that Ed Sheeran has had will be kind of dated and fading, this will stick around just like that castle. Just watch for it. Number 8. You ever hear a song that's so fucking great, you just know they've already earned themselves a career, especially when 10 years later, it's still as phenomenal as it was, as it always was.
It's 1:15. I'm all alone and I need you now.
Look, I've fallen in and out of love with Lady Antebellum a lot in the 2010s. They've made a lot of boring or underwhelming albums. They always seem to be underachieving, but then they pull something like this, or Charles Kelly makes a solo album and it features some of the best songs of 2016, and it just makes me wonder what sort of cattle prod do we need to hit them with in order to get something that lives up to all of this potential consistently. But really, what do I even need to add to talk about Need You Now? It is a crossover country classic, a downbeat duet full of heartbreak, regret, desperation, alcohol abuse, and bad decisions, and the interplay between Charles Kelly and Hillary Scott kind of leaning into all that, it's phenomenal. The subtle bass line is stellar off the guitar interplay with the piano, the pickups that sound of the time in 2009, 2010, as does the subject matter, which in a year of clubbing hits the precise note underpinning the emptiness, but it's a song that's actually stuck around regardless, basically holding the torch for whatever's left of adult alternative, even as this is still grounded in Nashville. And I think the power, it comes most from the bridge, because I'd rather hurt than feel nothing at all. I mean, there doesn't need to be any more reasons why it's here. It's a classic, and deservingly so. Number 7. So, the more astute among you might have realized there aren't a lot of rap songs on this list. I mean, there's a few, sure, but they're more pop crossovers, and given how much the genre has dominated, especially in the latter half of this decade, it is a conspicuous absence. And look, I don't know what to tell you. The rap I tend to like has focus and sharp flows, more storytelling, well, more of a topic beyond flexing and taking your girl. And as such, a lot of the rap I really love doesn't chart in the same way, which makes this anomaly still kind of shocking to this day.
I got royalty inside my DNA. Cocaine quarter piece, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got power, poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA. I got hustle, though ambition, flow inside my DNA.
I said this at the time, I'll say it again. Songs like this don't chart. Hell, outside of the nascent streaming era, I don't think they would have ever charted. This has no hook. It features a beat switch into a more immediately abrasive and dark second half, where the heavy bass gets heavier and the swamped out melody gets sliced out from the guitar into these echoing vocal fragments. It's haunting as hell. And amidst all of it, Kendrick is flowing his ass off, giving a giant middle finger to larger media organizations and society at large that would dare place him in a box and stigmatize his genre, even with the acknowledgement that there is some very real darkness within him. But he contains multitudes, and they explode forth from every pore, especially expanding upon the biblical framing of his coming amidst a fracturing world. Hell, it's the big biblical framing of the album, or really just a continuous reality, as he will reference Curtis Blow's breaks and show how despite hip-hop's evolution, it and black men are still being treated in a similar way, no matter how many accolades he will pile up. It's a bleak, punishing song that only ramps up with intensity with every bar, and again, Nobody could have conceived this as a hit, but it is one, and Kendrick is such a force of personality that he made this list. And while, again, his best songs are still not his hits, if only King Kunta could have been as big as it should have been, this still kicked all amounts of ass. And that new Kendrick album, apparently coming this year, can't come soon enough. Number 6. This is higher on the list than I expected. Well, if you had told me at the beginning of the 2010s this guy would have made my list at all, I would have called you crazy. But yeah, call me that and call this the most obvious piece of critic bait there is. Sometimes it works.
I took a pill in Ibiza to show Avicii I was cool. And when I finally got sober, felt 10 years older, but fuck it, it was something to do.
I'm still amazed to this day how Mike Posner, of all people, managed to capture this sort of existential emptiness and dread that seemed to permeate through 2016 in a Tropical House remix of an only okay acoustic folk song. It's a song that was built for pop nerds who remembered or even slightly cared about Cooler Than Me, took note of its failure, and then watched a career revival that frankly sputtered out just as quickly as it started. Mostly because the revival was built on a song finding poignancy out of all that failure. There are so many cutting lines that can only come from somebody who is hitting rock bottom. And I don't think any of us were prepared for the added layer that comes with realizing he was trying to impress Avicii by taking a pill to prove some veneer of coolness. Yikes. And as so many have stressed, it is that dance remix that has given the song its weight and heft. Not only the proof that the genre can carry it to the shock and dismay of a certain old guard of critics, but also deepening the emotional appeal. I have no clue if Mike Posner can sustain any more of a career. Hell, he walked across the United States in promotion of his next project, the sort of misguided stunt that may have been way more pain than it was worth, which gives me the impression that he will not capture this sort of magic again. But again, it was magic, and a bitter pill we had to swallow, but ride out all the way. Number 5. And on the topic of artists that I really wish would recapture some of that magic again.
Die for each other, we're cool for the summer.
I remember how shocked everyone was when I placed this as my favorite hit song of 2015. From what I could tell, some people thought this came out of nowhere, which does serve as a good reminder that less people care about the oblique opinions you throw out on social media than you might think. But to me, Demi Lovato had finally realized the potential that she had always had. I remember liking Heart Attack off of 2013's Demi, but this was a different monster. She had honed in on the subtlety and smolder and leaned into her bi-curious side, and it worked. Mostly because she backed up that smolder with some ragged but explosive guitars and enough space to belt when she absolutely needed to, plus some really great piano flourishes. I've said in the past that this is probably the most obviously flawed song to ever top one of my list, and that's mostly because it can be read as queer baiting in an era where a lot of pop stars did it around the turn of the decade, and Demi Lovato hasn't really discussed her sexuality openly, but does she need to when she doesn't pull punches and trying to learn more about herself, and hasn't her entire career, especially in recent years, been about reclaiming the lens and narrative in which she's seen? What's wrong with being confident? But at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much attention this has received, but to me, this is Demi Lovato's peak. I'd love to see her get close to it again. This is something special. Number 4. So remember when I said there were 2 songs that were offbeat hits from the indie sphere that nevertheless were forgotten at the time, but really have persisted to getting even better as the years have passed? Yeah, about time we talk about the other one.
'Cause though the truth may not be this, shit will carry our bodies safe to the shore.
I think I understand why people missed Little Talks. It was a song that was from a weird Icelandic band that had made waves with the excellent My Head is an Animal, if you were in the know, but it was never really a critical darling by the Western critical press and the mainstream because it played broader and kind of wilder with its tones, while still seeming accessible enough to the early 2010s folk scene to be categorized and then ignored by a lot of people, thinking they weren't doing anything more special. but it still remains a force unto itself if you know, with the blazing horns riding the cushion of acoustics and surprisingly tight drum work with the supple touches of reverb to accentuate the distance between the partners. Another great example of leaning into that interplay of the duet. Take notes, mixed gender bands. And while the band has always been coy surrounding about what the message of the song really is, it's more about the acceptance of distance, be it from a partner who has long broken up and then faded into memory, or someone who has passed on and where your whispers make you question your own sanity. And like, despite how much one partner might want to reunite with the other, it's a gulf they don't dare cross. Don't listen to the word I say, the screams, they all sound the same. In short, it's got the mystique and feel of an old folk song that's trying to evoke something almost primal in its writing and structure, and when the tune is this goddamn good, they just nailed it. I still contend this group is underrated, and they had a few absolutely stellar songs on their album from last year that once again went overlooked, but this is a forgotten gem. It's worth digging up. Number 3, and yet, funnily enough, in a distance between partners, the most insurmountable is time. And when you have an artist who has made her name making songs that might as well feel timeless, and yet always seem to carry a weight beyond her years.
Let me photograph you in this light in case it is the last time.
This is Adele's best song. And again, she wrote this in her mid-20s, and it'll serve her well the rest of her career. The soulful pianos textured with just enough weight around the bass and backing mix to imply an older sort of glamour in order to paint the scene, where she sees the lover from years past and remembers enough of the allure to be drawn in, and she wants to preserve that moment and that last bit of lingering affection however she can. That might just capture the impossible moment that's long past. She hates that she's getting old. She hates that those times are slipping further and further away. She hates that she still cares at all. She knows that she should be better than this, but it's a song with the finality to allow that transgression, allowing the memory before she continues on. It's a song that makes you question what time has already taken from you, but hell, that's inevitable. The song works damn near perfectly to capture what is and what might have been. And given the bar that Adele set for herself yet again, I can only wait to hear where she will dare to soar. Again, modern classic, but you already knew that. Number 2. I mean, I've been praising this song consistently for years. It's barely a hit. I know for a fact there's a swath of critics who will never really care about, nor talk about, nor even consider this. But at the end of the day, I got to appreciate the best country hit of the decade that rose above the chaos in country this decade, and given the tragic decline of the band, really does stand alone.
He said, I wanna see you again, but I'm stuck in colder weather. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Can I call you then?
I'm not sure I can call this the Zac Brown Band's best song. I mean, there are cuts from Uncaged that put that album among the best of 2012. And you know what? I could argue there's even competition on You Get What You Give. But again, I look to Colder Weather and I hear a singular entity within the genre, taking the tropical beach parties the band likes to languish in and gives them all the melancholy and misconnections by flipping it into the frigid winter of Colorado, where he has to take to the road so many times but dearly wants to make that dangerous trek home. And I like how, despite the fact there is a real understanding between the partners on the song that he has to go to the road time and time again, but between the pianos and the rich vocal harmonies, the wells of pedal steel and fiddle, the flesh out just enough organic warmth even before the song kicks into the bridge and the even bigger final hook where the guitars and the cymbals, they crash to pick up some of that sweep of that weather, only helped further by the spare emptiness that's allowed to hang before those final lines. But in reality, the song is just so melodically robust and rich that the Zac Brown Band themselves, they've been cribbing it from years now, as have a lot of Nashville songwriters. And I get it. The song is sweeping, it's beautiful, it's got such a striking command of its dynamics and its organic presence, all the while feeling country and cutting to the bone. There's really only one hit that could have been better this decade, number 1. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a surprise. If you know me, you know what's coming. And I'm not sure it could have been anything else for me. I mean, by this point, I'd been a fan for years. I'd seen her live. I'd met her in person. I've been a defender of this work that many critics up until this moment were not given the time of day. And if the content was lightweight, or she was just doing what she had done previously on past hits, that'd be one thing. But that's not what this is either. Instead, it captured what some of us knew had been between the lines for years, an art that picked up its gravitas and societal weight from everyone else when we knew it wasn't new. It was a culmination. And not that I care much about this sort of thing, but for her sake, she really did deserve the Grammy, even though deep down that'd be a level of holding themselves accountable that organization will never dare to do properly. But at the end, we still have the art. And this song again stands alone.
I hope you're somewhere praying, praying. I hope your soul is changing, changing.
You know, the funny thing, it's not even the best song from Rainbow, and I'd argue that Rainbow isn't even her best album, Warrior is. But 2017 was a year where critical narratives blew apart, first with Harry Styles and then with Kesha, but hers carried so much more weight. Her image was so defined, she was so instantly recognizable as a mainstream pop star. She had the personality and the firepower to carve out a niche so deeply that even if you recognized her influences in punk and psychedelia and classic rock, she was never beholden to them. And then Praying was the moment where she finally took control of it all. And suddenly, everyone else saw what I did, saw what a lot of the fans did. A phenomenal songwriter and performer who knew how to deliver a massive crescendo and a huge hook. The emotional expressiveness that never needed auto-tune but used it to augment her personality. And writing that was both able to bear her truth to the world and bring down a brand of forgiveness that might as well be purifying. There are songs on this list that feel biblical, but this is the one where that scope doesn't define her, she defines it. And given who that song was targeting, the risk that was taken by pushing this as the lead-off single, setting the moment of her story where she could move on to whatever might come next, all amidst a world and industry that was never inclined to believe her. And in 2017 of all years, before the hashtag #MeToo movement fully exploded months later in the mainstream, where that ray of light was desperately sought, or you know what, maybe it's just the whistle note that blew everybody's mind. Who knows? Either way, even though I didn't quite love High Road this year, still some really good songs on it, Kesha remains the pop star of the 2010s to me. And this song represents the hope of freedom found. For me, it's the best hit of the decade, folks. Take that as you will. I know it's debatable, but not for me. But yeah, thanks a lot for watching this long. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Again, this was a lot, so I'm sure there's some controversial opinions. Comments are down there. Have fun. Beyond that, if you want to help support me on Patreon, I get it in this time. It's not always an option, but if you do, link's right over there. Be very grateful for it. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.